So our Avon and Somerset Police and colleagues have pre-recorded a video about how we can talk to children and how we can talk to families about the experiences of child sexual abuse. So let's hope this is going to work for us.
We want to talk about how do we approach talking to children and families about child sexual abuse. Good morning, I am Louise Catlin. I'm a Detective Inspector on Operation Ruby, which is our child protection team. Also today we have with us...
Good morning, I am Investigation Support Officer Liz Hall, also of Operation Ruby.
Thanks, Liz. So, Liz, I'm going to ask you a few questions, if you're just able to give your perspective on how you interview children. So, first of all, how do we plan as police for speaking with families and children?
So, we will always start with a child-centred approach. Anyone working with children should obviously see and speak to the child. The way that we do this is really important. So in the police, what we're always thinking about is how is this going to be used later on down the line in a Crown Court trial. That's the focus, that's what we're always thinking about. And our evidence collection has to be solely thinking about how the product will be used later on down the line, but obviously keeping the child at the heart of everything that we do. So we need to take their views seriously, we need to work with them and their families, and we need to speak in child appropriately aged language. We obviously use achieving best evidence, which is the guidance that the government provide for us to use to forensically secure the testimony of child witnesses. But that isn't just written for the police. That's also written for any agency that speaks to children. So the guidelines and all of the suggestions within that booklet, it's not a booklet, it's quite a hefty book, is not just for us, it's for anyone. So it can be really helpful to have an overview of what's actually in there. And if you've got a sense of what's in there, that will help you do your job. And obviously, if you are not police officers, then you are more likely to speak to the child before us rather than after us, because it's through your conversations with children that will prompt an investigation, because they are more likely to approach you as a health professional or a teacher or someone else that works, a social worker maybe. That will then trigger us carrying out a ABE interview. So we have lots of things to consider. We have a planning assessment document that we go through. We will be looking holistically at the child. We will be looking at what they're capable of linguistically, cognitively, if they have any disabilities, what their attention span is like, what would be best for them to enable them to give their best evidence, and also whether they are able to withstand cross-examination, because if they're not, then that's a big challenge for how this could then be proceed all the way through the criminal justice system. So there's lots of considerations for us very early on, and what you do will have an impact on what we then go on to do.
Yes, lovely. Thanks ever so much, Liz. So what are your top tips for professionals navigating with a child or family? And why is language so important? Why does it matter?
So there are a number of things that you need to think about. I think the first thing is, if a child chooses you to speak to about child sexual abuse, that's quite a privilege. They will have chosen you for a reason, and often that's because you have some sort of relationship with them and they can trust you and they feel that they can speak to you. So one of the first things is, try not to say, oh, don't speak to me, let me go and find Mrs. Jones or someone else, because if they'd wanted to speak to Mrs. Jones, they would have chosen her. They've chosen you. So you are the person that they want to speak to. Try and react calmly, even if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't quite know what to say and I need to be aware of what I'm saying. That's all really important, but you don't need to be scared. You know, there's some real basic principles that will help you. So be really aware of your non-verbal messages, because You can say, tell me everything, but if your non-verbal communication is saying, oh my gosh, don't tell me anything scary, a child is likely to pick that up. So try and enable what you're saying to match with your non-verbal communication. If you keep your responses slow and simple, short and gentle, then that will also really help. Now, it could be that this moment has arisen at the most inconvenient time, which is often the case. So you might be wanting to say, oh, let's go and find somewhere quiet, or let's find somewhere other than where we are, if you're stood in a car park or something. So find somewhere quiet that you can go and have this conversation. But just try and keep yourself calm rather than sort of go into a bit of a panic. If the child is just telling you, try not to stop them, because as you know, if you've psyched yourself up to tell someone something that's difficult, if you are then stopped, it can be really difficult to get going again. So really try, if they are just freely recalling and just sort of coming out with it, let them speak, because that's really important, and that evidence will be really important for you to remember. So you need to listen with intent to remember, which actually is quite hard, because what we need is, we don't need the gist of what was said, we really do need their words. And this is where the second part of that question that Lou just asked me, language is super important. What we don't want is for things to change. And this is often what happens. Words that are said by children and young people are taken, and then they're changed just slightly. So a road becomes a street, or a bush becomes a tree. Just those little nuances that can go on to become quite tricky, evidentially, later on down the track. So try and really remember the words that the child or young person says. And if they are telling you a lot, it's perfectly okay to say, what you're saying is really important, I need to take some notes. And then actually take some notes. You don't have to have the child sign those notes. They can be your notes of what's said, that's fine. If the child is prepared to sign them, fine, but it's not a requirement. They're for you, to help you remember what you've said. Try, despite the temptation to ask for more, your job is not to interview this child forensically. That's our job, and we will do that. So once you get to the stage where you think, I have enough information that I'm concerned such that I need to go and pass this information on, or I've got a situation here which I'm going to need to refer on, try to resist asking lots more questions, because obviously what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect this evidence the best we can. And what we don't want to do is ask the child the same questions time and again. So when you have sufficient that you're thinking, right, I now know that I need to refer this on to someone else, this is a police matter, then pass that information on. And you can do so very carefully by saying, thank you, what you've said is really important. I now need to do and follow whatever your procedures are. And often that's speaking to someone that has the child protection designated role within your organisation. And then obviously make notes as soon as you can while your memory is fresh about what's been said. If you have difficulty understanding the child's method of communication, then obviously seek help. Sometimes children say things that could be a concern. So for example, if a child said, I don't want to go home, I'm really scared of my dad, that could be a number of things. And unless you've asked a few questions, you're not going to know. It could be something that we, the police, need to know about. It could be a whole load of things that we don't need to know about. So you're going to need to ask some questions. So the principles are, please ask open questions. So a really good open question to that sort of statement from a child would be, tell me all about that. Try and resist saying, oh, why is that? Because why questions can be really tricky. they tend to be used with children where we are apportioning blame. So that's not helpful, but particularly in sexual abuse, because we don't want the child to feel it's their fault. They may well already feel that. So we don't want to compound that by asking them the same question. So if you ask a question like, oh, tell me all about that, it's facilitative. Basically, what you're saying is, the floor is yours, I'm listening, tell me everything. And that is a far better way to collect the information that they are going to give you so that you can make a decision about what you're going to do about it. Explain is another option, but explain is tricky, particularly for little ones. So, you know, tell me or talk to me about that. All of those sorts of things basically are the best type of question that you could ask a child in that situation. And then going forward, the questions that you really need to know is who, what happened, and potentially when. Where and how long, and all those other questions are questions that you can leave for us so that you can then keep this child safe. So if you're at a situation where the person that has actually done this to them is maybe with them or in the next room or coming to pick them up, you might need to do something to make sure that that doesn't happen, because that's not going to be safe. And when will just give us a time frame as to whether this is acute, so it's happened maybe in the last 24 hours, which for us evidentially is crucial because they're in the forensic window. Obviously, the forensic window for children is bigger than 24 hours. 72 hours would be ideal, but our health professionals will always try their best, even if the timescales are bigger than that. But if we're talking about, you know, a month, 2 months, 6 months, or a year ago, then it just changes our priorities. So those are the really important things. You can give some reassurance to the child. So you can say things like, thank you for telling me. You have done the right thing in telling me, but really try not to pass any judgment about what's happened, because they might be telling you something that you think is awful, but if you say, oh my gosh, that's really awful, it may well make them feel worse. So passing a judgment about what's happened isn't helpful to them. Plus, as we know, sexual abuse is tricky. So they may still love the individual that's done this to them, but they might not like what they've done. So just try and give some reassurance to the child about what they've done as being really the best thing. Make a written note and then report as soon as you can. And if anything happens between them making that comment to you and telling you what's happened and then speaking to someone, like they've received a text message or a phone call and their demeanour has changed, all of that sort of stuff we need to know about. You know, who was that? Have they been threatened? Are they being told not to tell us? Those sorts of things. And there are some phrases that are helpful that I can give you. So you cannot promise confidentiality. If a child says, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anyone else, obviously you can't do that. What you can say is, what you're saying is really important. I'm really glad that you were able to tell me. I'm going to do my best to help you. And this is so important, I need to speak to someone else about it. So those are key messages. These things tend to happen at the most, not inopportune, but the times when you least suspect it, I suppose. So it tends to catch you out a little bit. But the main thing for me is don't panic, stay calm. Remember, you know this child generally, and if you don't, then all the same principles apply. But just keep your language really simple. Use words that they understand, and let them tell you what, because they've got the information, and then make sure that you record it and pass it on. And if you are able to do that, that will enable us, the police, to do our job. What we don't want is for the child or young person to have been interviewed by 4 or 5 people by the time they get to us, because what can happen then is often, and I've had this recently, is a child will say, when I've asked them to tell me, they say, oh, but I've already told so many people, why don't you go and ask them? Which is really unhelpful. So those are my key top tips, I think.
That is lovely, really insightful. Thank you so much, Liz. So I guess the key takeaway message is it doesn't have to be the police or specialist organisations that speak to children about this. We know professionals can sometimes be scared or nervous to speak with children and families around child sexual abuse, but we need to let everybody know that is actually okay. So thanks ever so much, Liz, for your really insightful input. Thank you.